And Target is the only place you can find them and all their gear. Come join the fun and jam with us.
Love is all you need.
Blog Talk Radio.
Now you guys know that I've gotten so used to saying Sin's Chat Corner, which basically that is the platform that we're on tonight, that I was going to say welcome to Sin's Chat Corner, but this is technically Sun Spotlight. This is the first Sun Spotlight radio show we've had in over a year. Long story short, you all know the story. So we'll get to call business because I don't want to have George holding too long. There's 4 things on the docket that I want to talk about news-wise. Very unexpectedly, I have now booked myself for a Sunday morning show. If you know me, you already know I don't do anything in the morning, and least of all a radio show. But it is for charity, and guess what? Oh, my God, it's an NFL football player along with an organization. Talk about a laugh and an inside joke. In any case, Sunday, 11 o'clock a.m., I'm going to be on air with a company, or I should say a nonprofit called Walking with Anthony. It's actually a spinal cord injury foundation. They're having a benefit on Monday the 19th in Washington. So we'll be talking about current and former Washington Redskins players. We're going to be having the child on, Anthony himself, talking about his spinal injuries. Very exciting. Sunday, 11 o'clock. Second of all, do not want to forget to my New Yorkers, Friday, 5 to 9, they're having the grand opening at Lubella Boutique, which is 33 Page Avenue, Staten Island. To those of you who don't know, that happens to be Kim Capone's place. And Kim actually used to be a member of the Real Housewives. Okay, what day is it, Cindy? Mob Wives of New York City. She's also a friend of mine, and I'm a supporter of the Mob Wives, so please do your deal. Get out to Staten Island. Last thing I want to mention before I go on, I was just alerted before I went on air, probably about an hour ago, and most of you already know him, Ambrogino, who's in the hospital for the last 2 days, and just as I feared or expected, he is now a pancreatic cancer patient. So before I start to cry, this is what I will say to you, Big A Man. I'll be talking to you after the show, and I love you, and my support is with you and your family, and I'm so very sorry to hear the news. So, without further ado, I don't need to introduce tonight's guest. I've already said his name about 17 times on my wall and on my show wall. So, without further ado, let's talk to George. Hi, George.
Hello, how are you?
Hello? Hi, can you hear me?
Can you hear me? I can hear you.
I can hear you. Can you hear me? You can hear me.
I can.
Hi. How are
Yes,
you?
I can.
Good.
I'm great.
Sorry, I didn't mean to keep you holding. I had some business that I had to tend to, and here we are, and I just want to say thanks so much. Oh, my gosh. I have 8 parts to ask you, so there's a lot to ask. I have a lot of information and a lot of questions. Okay, so let's start TV first. I think to me that's the most intriguing part, and oftentimes when I mention George Christie, most people will recognize you from obviously the show on the History Channel. But I want to talk about a couple different things. Now, there was a TV series that you were on called Codes and Conspiracies. So I was curious to ask you, what element of those episodes kind of enticed you into wanting to participate in something like that? Because that doesn't seem to be your forte. Forgive me for saying that.
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, I was on my way to turn myself in Texas. I had a year I still owed the federal government. And I had met the producer, Art was his name, and I liked the guy so much, I decided just to do the show. And, you know, I really never got to see it because I was incarcerated when it aired. But, you know, my position was I was trying to break some of these ridiculous rumors and whatnot. And so how the final edit came out, you probably know better than I because I didn't see it.
I do know, actually. I do because I've watched it. You know, I've watched everything George Christie because that's what you do when you investigate someone. You're like, I literally have to see every part of him. It's not nearly as impressive as Outlaw Chronicles. I'm not going to lie about that. I guess that might default. You may not be able to answer my other question, which is if people listening in today want to go back and watch something like that, is it accessible? I'm assuming it's accessible online, right, where people can watch it if they want?
I believe it is, you know, and also I think George Weggers was on it, wasn't he? From the leader of the Banditos.
I want to say yes. Don't quote me. I'm not 100% sure, but I think you're right on that. But I'm sure somewhere. Reasons,
you know, George and I did a lot of work to end the conflict in Europe between our two clubs. Obviously, I think everyone knows I'm not a member of the club anymore, the Hells Angels. But George and I did a lot of work, and George decided he was going to be on it. Art seemed like a real positive guy, and that was one of the other reasons I went on it. I feel that any time, I can kind of get the word out there that all these conflicts between these different clubs is just not productive. I do it, and I'll continue to do it. I'm not. I've been ridiculed for it, but I really don't care. People said a lot of things about me in the last few years. Even prior to leaving the club, there was always law enforcement saying things, or just people maybe out of the mainstream society that said things about me. But, anytime I can bring peace to the outlaw bike world, I'm going to go the extra mile and try to do it.
Sure. Okay. Well, I know you'll know a little something about this because I know you remember this appearance. CNN had called upon you to serve as what they called a quote-unquote crime consultant back in 2015. So I want to ask you this question. In your opinion, in what manner do you feel like, for instance, oftentimes people will go to so-called criminals versus the cops to act as an expert? Tell me why you think that is. Why is it that they do that? It almost seems kind of contradictory. Does that make sense in a way? Because most people look at the cops and law enforcement.
I've taken the position, just like I did with the History Channel show. I will, go on these shows if they call me with the understanding that I get to tell it from my perspective. I'm not going to be a mouthpiece for law enforcement, or I'm not going to be a mouthpiece, for the outlaw bike community. I'm going to say what I see, to be true, and that's what I'm going to project, from the position I take. A lot of times it's really difficult because you get on there and you're fighting for your, 60 seconds to get on the air. You've got the commentators that have an agenda. They've got the little earpiece in their ears, and the producers are throwing stuff at them, and they're trying to troll what everyone's saying. And if you can get your foot in the door, so to speak. I thought that the last one I did about the Waco shootout, I really got my point across, and I was happy with it. Am I an expert? I don't consider myself an expert. I just consider myself a participant in that whole lifestyle. So maybe that does make me an expert. I don't know.
Sure. And the reason I brought that up in part was because I watched the interview on CNN, and the one thing that resonated in my own head, as a journalist myself, I thought, I would not do this to this person as a journalist, meaning I always feel like they're kind of going after you, like they're asking you your opinion, and then they're saying, boom, and they're kind of throwing you up against the wall the minute after they ask you. Does that make sense? I don't know if you felt that way.
Well,
it seemed to be that way.
And
when
it
I
does, and
it.
I think I alluded to that just a moment ago. Like I said, I think they've got the producers, in their ears. The commentator has the earphone on, and the producers feeding them information. So you're kind of up against the wall when you do this stuff. A lot of people think that it's really easy, and you just get up there and take your position. I went on 60 Minutes with Mike Wallace, and another member went on that particular show with me, and the guy had never done any interviews before, and he wound up, getting chopped off at the knees by Mike Wallace. I mean, Mike Wallace is just a really, I don't know if you know who or remember Mike Wallace. I don't know how old you are, but he's one of the premier interviewers over the years. I mean, he was just a real barracuda.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do remember, in fact. And to those of you that haven't read the book, and I have, he talks about it, and there's this, I can't say it, but there's that story. I'll tell you off air, but it's a cute little story that you were talking about Cheryl and Mike Wallace. It was so cute. I was like, it's probably not cute when he was married to her, but it's kind of like cute now. But we don't want to too much.
I thought it was funny. So, Mike Wallace really seemed to be attracted to my ex-wife, who's now no longer living, and they were kind of flirting with each other. And I had just come back from prison. My marriage was spiraling out of control, my first marriage, and I was kind of chuckling. I was thinking, okay, Mike, take her off my hands. And, it was just one of those kind of kids' dreams. And, the interesting thing, Mike says, well, what do you think, Cheryl? And she says, well, I think I'd like to be on 60 Minutes. And, if you remember this in the book, he actually did a 60-minute interview, a fake 60-minute interview, edited it, which it looked like a real 60-minute interview, and sent it to her. And she was so excited when she got that, and she showed it to everybody. And, bless her heart, I guess that was her 15 minutes of fame,
Right. Oh, definitely. I just got such a kick out of that story. And there's many, folks, just so you know, many, many stories, as I'll allude back to the book as much as I can because it's not technically out yet. But now, speaking of consultants, I want to mention to everybody, because not everybody knows this, that you obviously founded Felony Prison Consultants as an instrumental tool for those that are going to be incarcerated. So maybe you could talk to me a little bit about, or talk to your audience, to those that might be facing some sort of incarceration. What do you offer them? What sort of services? And if they need your help, how do they approach you about getting it? Because that might be pretty tough for people, I'm gathering.
Well, it is. And, how this started was my daughter's a criminal defense attorney. And I wound up babysitting a lot of her first-time offenders. And, so I came up with this idea about this, possible new business for white-collar criminals, first-time offenders. And, I also kind of hold their hand through the whole court process, give them my opinion if I think they've got a chance to win the case, lose the case. And I don't talk to them, in legal jargon. A lot of guys, go to their lawyers, and, lawyers are really busy. And, criminal law is a very specific art. And, they talk to their clients condescending. People get mad at them. One of the interesting things, you get out on the prison yard, and you never hear the guys talking about the FBI agent that put them behind bars, the U.S. attorney that put them behind bars. It's always the criminal defense lawyer's fault. And, my first experience was in 1986, 87 with that. And after my daughter became a lawyer and I worked in the office as administrator, I just came up with this thought. I think there's a void that needs to be filled to help these people that are scared. They don't understand what's going on. These lawyers are running sometimes 100 open cases. They don't have time to explain every detail to the client. And when they don't, rightfully, the clients get mad at them. They want to know what the hell is going on.
Right, of course, definitely. And how long have you been doing
that's what I do. I explain the situation, and if they're unfortunate enough to get found guilty, then we take it to the next level, and I talk to them about, what to anticipate, what to expect when they get in prison. And, prison has evolved a lot. Back in the 80s, the first time I got arrested by the feds, for a murder that never happened, and I ultimately beat the case. But the prison system is completely different now. And, you get in there, the food's terrible, it's crowded. I was in a cell in Texas. We had 6 guys in the cell. Thank God the banditos were there. And, they had everything was waiting for me when I got there. I had a lower bunk cell. I had clothes, I had food. But a lot of these guys, they get into these overcrowded conditions, never been there before. Some of them, first thing they ask you is what your crime is. And, there's specific things that happen to specific people for specific crimes. And, child pornography, rape, whatnot, they don't go over very well in prison. And, in the old days, people would lie and, their paperwork would not catch up with them. But nowadays, you go into the prison, they come up to you, who's ever running that quad or unit, someone from your race comes up to you and says, what are you here for? And you tell them, and they get your name, and they immediately have somebody go over to the phone and call home, and they get online, and they look up and find out exactly what you did. So, it's a real transparent world, a lot more transparent than it used to be.
Yeah, and that actually is a segue to one of the quotes. I've taken a bunch of different quotes out from your book, and the one that I found intriguing relative to this topic actually is you say, jail can be tougher than prison. And so I wanted to ask you, to those that are listening in, because a lot of people lack knowledge of the correctional system, period, altogether, the difference between jail versus prison, because you make it sound like, being in jail versus being in prison is different. So I want you to talk about the differences and also maintaining your serenity during solitary, because you talk a great deal about it's literal madness
Yeah, I spent a year in solitary confinement in the Ventura County Jail, and the guys were coming down for writs and different stuff from Pelican Bay. Pelican Bay is the end of the line in the California Department of Corrections. That's where they send all the hard cases, any high-power gang members or whatever, you go to Pelican Bay. And the guys would come down from Pelican Bay into the Ventura County Jail, and they would just die to get back up to the Bay because the Ventura County Jail was so terrible. I spent a year down there. You have to hold it together, compartmentalize your thoughts and, make sure they just don't drift or spiral out of control. In addition to that, the time I was in there in 2001 to 2002, they had what they called disciplinary diet. If you got into any trouble, they would take all your commissary away. They would take your regular mainline chow food away, and they would give you this meatloaf, they called it. It was a protein loaf. You'd get a protein loaf in the morning with 2 slices of bread and water or milk, depending the availability. And then in the evening, you'd get another loaf with 2 slices of bread and, again, water or milk. And, ultimately they got a writ through, and, it's now no longer part of the, state penal system in California. They stopped the disciplinary diet. It was terrible, But,
Sure.
you get in there, you're in there with people that have never encountered jail before. You're in close quarters. You get off to a prison, and they have things that you can get. Some prisons you can get a TV in your cell. They've got all types of recreation. They've got educational classes, hobbies. They've got a lot of things to do. So doing time in a local facility isn't all it's cracked up to be. A lot of the guys, they plead out. They like to get up to the state prison, do their time, and get their program going. It may sound, crazy, but it's the truth. Another thing is when you're in a higher security prison as opposed to a lower security prison, the protocol that people have is much better. In a high security prison, everybody knows how to behave. When you get in a low security prison where there's a lot of first time offenders, they don't know the protocol of prison, and there's a lot of problems, a lot of fights. I was in a minimum security in prison in Texas, but there were, stabbings and fights and whatnot because the prisoners that were making their way down from medium to low security prisons, had a specific way they thought people should conduct themselves. You get these white collar criminals coming in there and not understanding the dynamics. They wind up getting stabbed or beat up or whatever.
Can't even imagine. My goodness. Well, thank you. Okay, I want to switch over and I want to talk about the History Channel, obviously. Honestly, and I'm not going to lie to you, thousands of people have been synonymous with saying my initial introduction to George Christie was the History Channel, of course. And the name of the show, to those of you that don't know, it's called Outlaw Chronicles, Hell's Angels. So there's 2 different questions that I have for you, and I'm sure you've probably been asked this one before. Do you think that fans would it be fair to say, fascinated or fixated by the world of Hell's Angels?
I think you've got both. I think you've got the people that are fixated. I think you've got the people that are fans and fascinated by it, and I think they live vicariously through a lot of these programs. America has a romance with outlaws. They always have. Mm-hmm. And, this country was birthed in revolution, governed by outlaws initially, and I think those roots are very deep within this system and continue to this day, and will probably 100 years from now, there's still going to be maybe a different type of outlaw, but I think that romance with the outlaw will always last, and I always think there'll be outlaws in this country.
Sure. Now, when you were approached about doing this, I wonder, was there any apprehension? Obviously some people watch this and they think, oh my gosh, he's talking about this happening, and he's sharing, in essence, secrets that people typically don't find out or don't know. Was there any apprehension in your mind? Did you hesitate at all when a producer walked up to you and said, hey, this is the content, this is what we want to do?
Well, I had mixed emotions about it. I'll tell you, when there's been a lot of negative things said about me by my former club. People have stooped so low as to say I'm an informant, although, they won't say who I informed on or who I testified against. And, I thought, well, why not do it? I've set the record straight once and for all, and that's what I set out to do. The interesting thing was I initially was approached when I was still in prison in Texas. I got the first email in March, and I kind of thought it was a joke. I don't know if your listeners know, but they have a federal email system, and everything's subject to being looked at, but you can email in and out once the the Federal Bureau of Prisons approves the person writing you. The History Channel, the producers, got approved, and they started writing me, and I kind of brushed it off as, okay, we'll find out. And then they called the warden, and the warden freaked out.
Oh, my.
She was a new warden. She didn't want any controversy. She had been put on, I think she might have been the second or third warden to take over this prison after a riot between two Mexican cartel gangs. The one gang overpowered the other, and simultaneously on 5 different areas killed 5 guys. And this prison had moments of real volatile conflicts, and so I don't think she wanted anything or any troubles. It was funny because she would go out in the chow hall in the main line every day at noon, and anybody that had a complaint, she would listen to their complaints. And after the History Channel started approaching me, I tried to approach her a couple of times, and she turned and went the other way. So I
imagine.
She didn't want to talk about it. And the History Channel wanted to come there, film me in the visiting room. They said absolutely not. Then they said they wanted to come on the grounds and film me walking out of the prison. They said absolutely not. And so we negotiated back and forth. I came home in August. In October, I signed a contract. This is 2014. And then I think it was a year later, 2015, the first episode aired.
That is correct, actually. As I was watching it, one of the things that went through my head, because I know who you are, obviously, or I have a good sense of who you are, was any part of you thinking to yourself that it was vital to you that the audience that was watching either got maybe a clearer or a greater grasp of who and what outlaw clubs are? I mean, was anything you said, anything you talked about, was it in the back of your mind, like, I want them to understand who these people are, who we are?
Absolutely. That was the understanding in the negotiations. My James Devine and Mariah Christie, my daughter, when they were negotiating this thing initially, and then later my management company took over. But, they said, look, George will do this, but he has to be given the venue, the forum to tell it from the outlaw perspective. And I think that's the first time. It's always been told through law enforcement. And what I thought was really great was, as we were editing this, they would show me, well, this cop said this, and, I would look at it, and if it wasn't correct, I would tell them I had the power. I said, cut that. That's not true. That's a lie, and that's hype, and they're spinning it. And so it was a real luxury for me from that perspective. I know some people complained about it, but, I think it was a great moment, for people that really love the old traditional outlaw ways. I never gave them any information that put anybody in jeopardy legally or put anybody in jail. And, most of the stuff was on the record. I made some clarifications. I was a Hells Angel in Los Angeles. When the war with the Mongols broke out, it was very volatile, and a lot of things happened real fast. This was back in the late 70s, and, it was a very serious situation. There were bombings in downtown Los Angeles. They found a supply house, is how they described it in the news, 2,000 pounds of dynamite in downtown L.A. I mean, it was a very serious war. We were going back and forth with the Mongols, and it still lasts to this day. And, I think it's interesting, the Mongols were a newer club at the time, and, after the initial conflict, what my position was, hey, let's negotiate with these guys to end this. And there were a lot of hard heads on both sides that, they wanted to keep going. And I find it ironic that I think we helped establish, the Hells Angels helped establish the Mongols as one of the premier outlaw bike clubs. I mean, they dug in and they said, we're not giving in. We don't care who you guys are. You're not going to tell us what to do. And, you've got to respect them for that.
Sure. I understand. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, here's another quote that I'm going to talk about. And the reason I bring this up is because I myself ride. I don't have my license, so I'm a backseater. And one of the things that I just, and there are many things that to those that follow me, you've seen that I have become a fan of George's little by little. And one of the reasons why is this statement right here. You understand it in a way you only understand a close friend. And by that, he is referring, of course, to his motorcycle. So what I would like you to do is to describe to the fans the meaning that a motorcycle has had to you as well as it has today. And I ask you this because my sense of things in today's riding society is a lot of it is for show. People are not riding as much as they used to, and the meaning has changed of what it means to be a motorcycle rider and or biker.
Well, I walked into this world in 1966. I bought my first motorcycle, a 57 straight leg panhead, for $200. And, in today's world, you can't even get a bike service for $200. And, back in those days, you had to build your own bike. It was, you could tell where somebody was from by what their bike looked like. If somebody was from San Bernardino, they had a particular look to their bike. San Diego, a particular look to their bike. Ventura, Oxnard, a particular look to their bike. And, it was almost like a geographical accent. You could actually tell where somebody came from. Nowadays, you can go in there and the floor. So I don't think they have the same, on the bikes that I built over the years, I had probably 4 bikes that were very meaningful to me. And they all had their own soul, if you will. I had a connection to them. And, like I think I stated it in the book at least once or twice, it's a real form of Zen riding a motorcycle. I mean, because you don't think about it, you just do it. And, that's Zen in the purest form. You just do it. You get on it and you do it. And it's a great, exhilarating feeling. One of the first time I went across country, I grew up in a real poor family. We never took a vacation. I don't ever remember going on a vacation once when I was a kid. Never stayed in a motel, a hotel, and the first trip across the United States as a Hells Angel to go to a club run, it was like a religious experience. I'm on my motorcycle. I'm experiencing all these different cultures, all these different people. I came back and started preparing for the next year. This was an annual event I did probably for 40 years. And so, it was a very personal and interesting thing. And I think that things are different nowadays. I hope I don't sound like some old man reminiscing, but
no.
I think things are different. I think there's some people out there that really enjoy riding and understand what it's all about, and I think they respect everybody. What everybody needs to keep in mind, it's a big highway out there with lanes going both ways, and you know what? We need to respect each other. That's what this whole country's about: is respect. Don't push on me, and I won't push on you. And I think the fact that people can go in now, buy a custom motorcycle, and go up to the rack and pick out these, dark colored clothes and, kind of create this outlaw image, I think it's taken away a lot, from the lifestyle. I'm not going to call it a sport. I'm going to call it a lifestyle because that's what I think it is, and it always was to me.
Correct. And fortunately in life, I'm fortunate enough to where I go in enough circles because I have this show. I meet a lot of people, and for them it is family. It is kinship. It's all about getting together and riding and being together and going and doing things together. It's just, I wish that everybody had your same mentality, that they had that sort of connection to a motorcycle, because I think that's important. That's the measure of a person and their ride, and it's very important to them. So since you brought that segue in to my next question, I started this radio show because someone approached me about interviewing the cast of Sons of Anarchy, which I have done. And I know that you've spoken about Kurt Sutter. So there's no better person to ask than the obvious. Obviously, I'm a fan of the show. I was a fan of the show. Some of my friends are on the show. Obviously, of course, his intent is to show life in an outlaw club. So my question to you is, in terms of accuracy, assuming you've watched it, of course, because I guess I should ask you, because if you haven't, it's a moot point. So I was just curious if you feel that he was even remotely close in accuracy as it relates to your lifestyle or your former lifestyle.
Well, I think it's a drama. And, people have to keep that context that it is a drama. I've watched parts of the show. I wasn't someone that watched it each week. I was too busy, maybe, and this may sound condescending. I don't mean to sound this way, but I was too busy living it. There was a lot of things going on at the time. And, I didn't have time to sit down and watch it, but it was a very popular show. Kurt Sutter tapped into something. Bravo to him, but I'll tell you, it impacted, the perception. My last trial in 2011, when I got indicted, and 2012 or 2013. 2013, we were picking the jury, and one of the voir dire questions I came up with myself was, "Do you watch Sons of Anarchy?" And if the answer was yes, do you think, as a leader, George Christie knew what everybody was doing, and George Christie directed everything that was taking place within the charter? And the judge kind of was, he kind of looked at me, and him and I developed this kind of interesting relationship. He looked at me and said, "That's a good question. I'm going to allow," because the judge has great control in the federal system. He says, "I'm going to allow this question to be asked." And the judge asked that question. The judge does a lot of the voir dire addressing to the potential jurors. And, people said, "Well, yeah, of course he knows everything." And then the judge said, "Well, how do you know that?" And they go, "Well, I saw it on Sons of Anarchy." So, I have mixed emotions about it,
Sure.
Was it a great show? Obviously it was a great show. What did it last, 7 seasons?
It did. It was 7 seasons, actually. Yep.
Yeah, that's a long run, man,
a lot of great people.
Yeah, so
it is actually, and they had a lot of. Yeah, it was great.
So I have, like I said, I have mixed emotions about it, but I don't have any axe to grind with Kurt Sutter or any of the participants in the show. I mean, they were performing, and they did a hell of a job, and Henry Rollins was on that show, and Henry Rollins was, the narrator on my show, and, Henry Rollins and I talked about it, when he was, doing the voiceover for it. So, like I said, I have mixed emotions about it.
I imagine.
It did impact the jury, it did impact the jury, but, we had to dismiss.
Well, and you also people. Have. Oh my gosh. Well, and the thing is too, and it drives me nuts because it is. And I look at the society and I'm like, there are people actually walking around with leather vests with Sons of Anarchy patches on them, like literal patches and on the back of their vests. And I'm thinking,
I know that.
They don't exist. You know that, right? Like they're not real. This is the real club. Charlie Hunnam's not running around.
Look at it from this perspective. How many directors, producers, and writers would like to be able to say, my show and my, perception influenced the federal jury. I mean, that's a very profound statement,
It is, actually.
Think about it.
Is.
It's a very profound statement. And, like I say, bravo to Kurt Sutter, I know some people have beat him up. What's that?
Well, the thing I feel badly about is, well, people watch this and then they formulate this opinion and they become so obsessed with this that it almost kind of influences our younger generation that look at how glamorous this is. You can have all this, and you know this because you've lived this. I fear for our younger generation that they're watching something on television that will influence them to make decisions that are very permanent in their lives that can have consequences.
You're absolutely spot on. And I'll tell everybody out there, getting shot at is not glamorous. Getting indicted is not glamorous. Fighting with other people that you have a common interest in is not glamorous. And going to prison for the rest of your life is not glamorous. And, people need to get back on track. This whole outlaw thing was not about being a criminal. It was about riding motorcycles and living, your own carefree life. It was live and let live. That's how everybody, that walked, at least the people that, I hung out with the question marks. From the question marks, the Satan slaves kind of schooled me and took me in, and then ultimately I ran into the Hells Angels in Los Angeles, and they asked me to join. Mm-hmm. But, we would have little problems once in a while. You might get in a fight with somebody in a bar over something, but, 9 times out of 10, you wound up going to breakfast with him, at 2 in the morning. It was a different, you might fight with these guys one week and then the next week, what the hell were we fighting about? I don't remember, but, nowadays everybody wants to go for their gun or they want to go, they want to take it to the next level. And, I understand times have changed, but, let's get back to basics here and enjoy the whole lifestyle.
Correct. I agree 150% with you, definitely. So thank you for that. One of the things that, again, is in the book that you talk about that's not any news to anybody, but I do want to talk about 1984. Of course, that marked the memorable Olympic carrying of the torch for you. So as you've shared, you've stated that a majority of men who are Hells Angels are also former military men, and they're also patriots. So here's my question. If you want to think back to that time and just kind of share with us, because almost none of us are ever going to get to do this. But more importantly, what was that like carrying that torch? But do you feel that at any point in time thereafter that people started to look at you, your club, let's say, as patriotic, military, veteran, someone to be respected? Did that gain you more respect, that action?
Well, it certainly changed the dynamics of everything. Initially, the reason we did that was because the alcohol, tobacco, and firearm agents were in town. There were some water events up here in Ventura County at Lake Casitas, and the ATF agents came to town and said that there was a possibility we were going to create problems and maybe even supply weapons to terrorists. And, we were so integrated within the community in Ventura that, I started having these store owners calling me and saying, you need to come down here. I need to tell you something. So, we came up with something to counter it, and, that's what we decided to do. And myself and Tiny from San Fernando Valley, we thought, hey, this is a great idea. We'll get out in front of this. And, there was some resistance from the club at first, some of the older guys. But, once we did it, everyone in the whole country, maybe the world for that matter, seemed to wrap their arms around it. And, it was great PR. It kind of, without sounding egotistical, kind of brought me into the limelight. Sonny was suffering from cancer at the time, and I wound up kind of becoming a spokesperson for the club. So it was a big change for me. I mean, it was a great conversion for me and a great honor. And I think a lot of people did start looking at us as patriots and veterans and people that supported this country and, weren't out to undermine it.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Now, to those of us that are listening, most of us have either ridden a motorcycle or currently do. So here I am, and I'm reading George's book, and I'm like, okay, I'm a pretty smart woman. And I come across some of these phrases, and I'm like, this has to be so biker that I totally don't get it. And I'm like, you're going to love these phrases. So I want you to explain all 4 of these. Because I read them, and I'm like, okay, what? Okay, hang around, honey.
About?
Now I can assume. Hang around, honey. What is a hang around, honey?
But these girls would come around, and they back in. I don't know if they even do it anymore.
Okay.
Guys would have their wives, and then they'd have their sweeties, and then they'd have their honeys, and that people in the outlaw bike world, they are very controlling, and I've never seen so many guys that they want to control and go out. As soon as they meet a girl, they want her to go out with anybody else. These guys would have 20 girlfriends that they didn't want them doing anything, and there's not enough hours on Friday night to entertain 20 girlfriends. So you'd have these guys, somebody would just make an offhand comment. That's my hang around honey, and maybe it didn't happen in other places or with other clubs, but it was pretty prominent here in Southern California.
Gotcha. Okay. Second term that we have, I don't hear this often. That's why I'm mentioning it. Tell somebody what it means to clean their clock. And I think most of us have some idea of what you're talking about, but you made some reference to cleaning a clock, and I'm like, oh, my God, I haven't heard that in so long. So, we're totally talking about that. So what does it mean to clean a clock?
Well, somebody keeps pestering you and pestering you and pestering you, and then when you finally have had enough, you don't just punch them, you clean their clock to make sure they don't come back for a second edition, I guess.
That's what I thought. Okay, I got it. Now, these last two terms actually are more relative, of course, to those of us who are not or weren't in the lifestyle, I should say. First of which is called what they would call a drug burn, and I read it and then I read it again, and I'm like, okay, maybe he needs to explain this. So explain what that term means, drug burn.
Well, back in the 60s, and we got caught on 60 Minutes with that statement. Back in the 60s, there was a lot of hippies running around Haight-Ashbury, and, we had developed a relationship with the Grateful Dead and Big Brother and Janice and the Airplane and Quicksilver, and guys were starting to sell oregano in joints for like 50 cents. They'd be selling just enough for gas money. And so the hippies would go complain, to the people in the music movement up there, and then the people would complain to us, and we were starting to get a name as, you can't trust these guys. And, we decided to stop that. And, it was up in the Bay Area. It was down in Los Angeles. No drug burns, Now,
Gotcha.
Later, it, carried over into some other business affairs as well that I don't really want to get into.
I understand.
Use your imagination.
Fine. I just thought to myself, okay. Yeah, of course, I'm sure we all have at one point in time. Trust me, I have for like a week. And the obvious term, because a lot of people who talk about you, and you've held no bones to say the words, I'm considered out bad, no contact. So to those that aren't an angel, we have no concept of what that means. So basically, in essence, the club is saying, which we can assume, of course, but what does that mean?
Oh, don't assume. They're saying it.
Because you killed. Oh, okay. Okay. I just want to clarify. So out bad, no contact. So you cannot contact a member cannot contact you, etc. Just give us an explanation of what that means. Exactly.
Okay, let me explain. What I thought it took me a couple of years to make up my mind if I was going to stay or leave. And, I certainly could have stayed. It would have been the easier choice, kept my mouth shut. There were a lot of things going on that I didn't care for. And I reached a point in time when I thought, you know what, I got to step up here, and I got to do this. I went to the meeting, resigned, which is the way you're supposed to do it, giving anybody the opportunity to, address any issues they had with me or confront me about anything. And I left, and then 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from the new leader, and I'm going to say this, who wound up becoming an informant in my case in 2011 after I got indicted. But anyways, that's beside the point. I just figured I'd throw that in there. He said, you know what, you're out. We changed your status. You're out bad. No contact. And I said, why? And they just said, well, there's some people that don't like some things that you did, and, people don't think you should have left. And I said, well, I did it the right way. And he said, well, this is our decision. So, I was then out bad, no contact, which means I'm pretty much a pariah. Nobody can
right.
approach me. Nobody can interact with me. And the interesting thing is, the Hells Angels and other outlaw bike clubs, we're supposed to be secret organizations. And
right.
once I got the phone call, I could not believe the social media shaming. And I thought to myself, this is what it's come down to. We're putting our personal business between members and ex-members, right on Front Street. And that's where the title came from. And,
right.
so, I guess, I'll take it a step further. Sonny and I had our issues for many years. The last 10 years, it was exceptionally volatile. And I left in good standing.
Yes,
and, 2 weeks later, I was in bad standing, no contact, and I think he was responsible for that. And, people said, that's not true, but, that's a position I've taken and I believe to be true in my heart,
Well, yes, and it's funny you mentioned the social media thing, because just last night I read something, it wasn't so long ago, that was posted, and it's a Sunny relative thing, and it was posted about you, and it was horrid, to be honest with you. There's a lot of that on social media about yourself, and I see it on your page. I see it everywhere. It's everywhere, and it's very unfortunate, as you said, because
it is.
Things are not so secret.
I think it takes away from the mystique of the club. I don't think that the club should interact with these trolls. I get these people that, write terrible things about me. And, they're untrue things. And, initially it bothered me, but I think that, having a show on television, I've subjected myself to even a larger audience. And,
right.
I made that bed, so I need to lie in it. And I know what they're saying isn't true. And my intellect, comes to terms with that. But I will tell you, sometimes my emotions, get the better of me, and I get angry. And Nikki just looks at me and shakes her head, and kind of puts things back in perspective.
I imagine so, definitely. Now, before we get into the other side of things, there's a couple of things that I want to mention to folks that they may not know about you, and I have one question relative to this. You've completed 2 years of college. I want to thank you before I forget, because I know you're a former Marine and you've served our country, and I appreciate that very much. I also know that this is what I want to ask you. The surfing and your time in the Marines, obviously you talk in the book about boot camp, et cetera, and it being an enlightening experience. So just touch upon how both the surfing aspect of things and being in the military, how they served to formulate you as a person, and how you carried that over when you were in the organization you were in. How did that help you?
It's interesting. My parents moved out of Anaheim area. There's a lot of juvenile delinquency going on down there. I was kind of running with a rough crowd. They moved up to Camarillo, Ventura area, and my dad had a restaurant, and one of the waitresses' son was a very exceptional surfer. I mean, he was one of the top surfers in Ventura County, and they talked her into petitioning her son to take me surfing, teach me how to surf. And, you hear the old expression, out of the frying pan into the fire. Well, these guys were the toughest guys in Ventura County in the beach, the whole beach surfing thing. And Stevie Binger, later got killed on his motorcycle. And Duty Juarez was, he was kind of the leader of the whole crew I ran with. And these guys surfed, and then we're making a transition into bikes. Like I said, Stevie Binger became a Hessian, and he got killed. And Ventura area was a very small community, and so making that transition out of surfing, the war in Vietnam was going on. About 26 of us joined a local Marine Reserve unit with the thought that it was going to be activated. And, we all went off to boot camp together. and I started having, and this shouldn't surprise you, I started having problems with authority. I didn't like taking orders from people I didn't respect. And I started, you all right?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Can you hear? Okay.
I read the book, so I know already that he's going to say,
okay.
I learned in school.
I started having problems, and I wound up, I loved the Marines. I loved the structure. I didn't like taking orders from people I didn't respect. I wound up having some issues, and I wound up having a real problem with gunnery sergeant, and I got court-martialed a couple of times, and they had a lot of money invested in me, and I got discharged, and a couple of days after my discharge, Navy intelligence guys showed up, and I wound up going to work for the Department of Defense as a communications troubleshooter. And, they would fly me out to San Nicolas Island, Santa Cruz Island. There was a lot of clandestine stuff out there for the Cold War. There was a submarine surveillance system out there, the missile system, and, some other things. So I wound up going from the Marines, getting the same year I was in the Marines and came home, I bought my first motorcycle, and a couple of years later, like I said, I got activated and immediately discharged. And then I went to work for the Department of Defense. I worked for the Department of Defense till 1978. And when I moved the charter from Los Angeles to Ventura, that's when one of the guys made a mistake and told the Department of Defense guys that I was a member of the Hells Angels. And shortly after that, I was given the choice. Do you want to be a Hells Angel or you want to work for the Department of Defense? And, for me, it was a no-brainer.
Right.
I said, I'll see you guys. And I got up and I left. And, as they say, the rest is history. I didn't look back.
You betcha. You bet. Now, one of the things that I've been saying all week long is that I would be out of the ordinary in terms of interviewing you because most people, of course, focus on the Hells Angel side of things, whereas I took the opposite route and I said, I want people to know who George the guy is. And most importantly, because I ain't going to lie, the first time I talked to George Christie, I was like, you kind of scare me a little bit. And I've been kind of scared all week. And now you're not. Your wife told me yesterday, she's like, he's so normal. And I'm like, no, George Christie is not the normal average guy, I'm guessing. But we're going to talk about the normal side of you. First off, okay, so these are just random questions. Obviously, you're a man on a motorcycle, so I'm going to guess if I'm sitting in your house right now, there's a motorcycle sitting outside. So if there is, we're just curious as to what that motorcycle is and who rides in the house.
Well, I'm the only one that rides, and I actually, when I left for prison, I had, part of the punishment with the feds is, they completely punish you. I lost my house. I lost my business. And when I left, I sold my motorcycle. And so my family could live while I was gone because, my income was taken away. My retirement was suspended while I was in prison. My federal retirement was suspended while I was in prison. And we no longer had the tattoo shop. But you're going to get a kick out of this. Are you a Breaking Bad fan?
Are you going to hate me if I say no? Because I watched like 6
I won't hate you.
And I'm like, dude, I can't get in. I'm totally not getting into it. I mean, I'm sorry. He's in an RV making drugs.
Right.
But okay.
Well, there was a character on there, and his name was Uncle Jack, and he was the head of the Nazi gang. And he lives about 2 blocks from me, and Michael Bowen and I have been friends forever. He's got about 5 motorcycles. So do I have a motorcycle?
Oh, wow.
No, I don't, but yes, I do. I go over to Michael's house, and I pick any bike I want. And I'm in the process of trying to decide what I'm going to do. If I'm going to build I'm thinking about building a custom bike, a little, we used to call them bar hoppers, just a little rigid frame, jockey shift, hot rod motor. Or I might go back. The last bike I had was a Ultra Classic, and it's funny because I never pictured myself on a full dress type motorcycle. I always resisted. And about 2005 or 6, I finally broke down and got one. And it kind of reinvented myself and reinvigorated my desire to ride. You know, it's
sure.
So I can't make up my mind what I want. You know.
That sounds like a true rider. That is for sure. Okay, so let's pretend we're sitting in your house right now. I'm going to go out on a limb because I already know that you're a history buff because you've admitted that before. So most guys like you are going to be sitting around. You're going to be watching all sorts of shows about making motorcycles, people on motorcycles, etc. So George is at home at night watching TV. What's George watching? Is he the motorcycle guy watching motorcycle shows, or is he totally like, let's watch Mad Men? Because I'm having a hard time picturing it. But go ahead.
Well, I like history shows. I work on I watch a lot of history shows. History's the Roman.
Okay.
I love Roman history. Caesar's one of my favorite dictators, I guess you can call him. I'm being a little bit funny right now.
I kind of.
But I think that whole I think that whole Roman era is amazing. Alexander the Great is amazing. Patton, I like to read about Patton. So that's the stuff.
Okay.
I'm kind of into. I like to. I thought it was interesting. Einstein came up with all these ideas, and everybody wanted to shoot him down. And people are finally catching up to him. I read a story yesterday where things he said 40 years ago. The scientists are just catching up. To it now. They're starting to understand what he was talking about. So I like innovative things like that. I haven't said much about it, but I've written another book. And
I was going to ask about that, George. Now you skipped.
I blew it, huh? It's a fiction book.
Yes, I have a question. It's okay, fine.
I'll wait.
Okay.
I'll wait.
Yes. Let's stop talking.
That's what I do. I work
on
my books. Say that again.
My question is because, and we're about to get to the kid portion of things, and the reason I brought that up is because I know that you have a child that's really close in age to my son. So I know that if I'm sitting at home with my kid, I'm going to tell you right now, they're going to be turning on the TV at a certain point being like, Mom, I want to watch Minions. I want to watch this. And obviously Finn's at that age, and so is Aubrey, right? Your younger one. So do they kind of sort of dictate
Finn is the youngest.
that?
Finn is my youngest.
Oh, I'm sorry. Why am I thinking that she's younger and he's older? Oh, okay. I got them mixed up. Okay. But I'm just thinking we're sitting at home, and I know in my house, when we get home, it's movie night at a certain time, and they're picking everything. Nothing to do with me, everything to do with them. So that's why I was curious, because I know you still got kids at home, and I wonder if they play a part in all that stuff.
Well, yeah. I mean, anybody that has kids at home, I have a 13-year-old, that's my youngest. I have my oldest is in her 40s, 4 children. Unfortunately, I lost my oldest boy last year. He went to sleep and never woke up, with pneumonia. But, Finn is, he teaches me something new every day. And, he teaches me tolerance. He teaches me to open my mind up to this whole new century we're in. He teaches me not to be afraid of my computer.
I knew it.
He tells me, you can't break them, Dad. You can't break them. Let's figure this out. And
that's
so,
cool.
it's interesting. He's really into games. He plays a lot of games. He programs, he codes, he makes his own games. That's what he wants to do when he grows up. But, like last night we watched Interview with a Vampire of all movies. And
good movie.
And
good movie.
Yeah, it was just, and he really enjoyed it. We sat through the whole, and it's a long movie, we sat through the whole thing together and, talked about vampires and, what it would be like to be a vampire. I mean, it was a really interesting night. I went to bed, thinking about vampires.
Oh, my gosh, how funny. And you know what's funny about George, to those of you that are listening that have only seen him on social media or maybe seen him on a page or whatever, some of the cutest things I ever see that are ever on his page, and it's always the 3 components, his children, his wife. Now, do you want to talk about Mr. Scruffy? because it's so funny because I'm like, oh my God, you look at him and there's George and here's this big tough guy and he's got this cute little white dog. It's so cute.
Well, did you see the picture where I got Mr. Scruffy?
Yes, I did.
I came home from jail, and anybody that re-enters into society, I don't care how long they've been there. I had spent 2 years on house arrest, and then I had hip surgery and had my hips replaced, and then I got sentenced, and I had to do an additional year. So I pretty much confined for 3 years. And when I came back, I was kind of going through a transition. I was, like I said, being attacked on several fronts, and my dog died. I had a dog, Ruby, I'd had for 14 years, and she died. And Nikki, this is Nikki's brilliance. I wasn't going to ever get a dog again, and she was driving, and she drove over to the Humane Society, and there was this poor little dog in there, Mr. Scruffy is what I wound up calling him, and all the other dogs were going ballistic and crazy, and he just sat there and looked at me and raised one paw up and looked at me like, come on, man, get me out of here. I know you understand. And so I went to the woman. I said, you know what, I want to get this dog. And, up here in Ojai where I live, they're very strict. I had to get my house inspected to see if they would allow me to get a dog. And,
serious?
I'm serious. And when the woman told me, I thought she was joking with me. She goes, well, we need to come over and look at your yard. And I go, what? She goes, oh, yeah. She goes, we don't give these dogs to anybody. And I kind of chuckled. And so they came over and inspected my place. And I was approved. And, Mr. Scruffy and I have become very close. In fact,
I imagine, and I see it in the picture.
Sleeping.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, this is important. We got to talk about this before we move on to the next thing. Obviously, as George has talked about, obviously your son George and Mariah, and of course Aubrey and Finn. One of the things I want to talk about, and it's always very important on any show that I do, Finn, a little earlier than 2 years of age, was diagnosed with autism. My nephew is autistic as well, and I realize the component and what that plays in there. So I'm going to ask you a twofold question. One of which comes from me, the other of which comes from my son, actually, and I asked your wife about this last night. So I said, I'm going to ask him about this, and we'll see. Autism. Just talk a little bit, because obviously you were caught off guard. Didn't know that this was going on with your child.
Off guard.
Right. So tell people
Finn seemed to be progressing normally, and he got to about a year old, maybe a little bit before. He quit talking. He seemed to create this gaze. He didn't focus on things. And Nikki's aunt is a nurse. And she said, I think there's an issue here. And she told us to go to Easter Seals. And that we went to Easter Seals, and then they immediately got us an appointment at this little place here in the Ventura area called Tri-Counties that work with autistic children. And, we just did an early intervention. Nikki just put everything into it. And, you really find out what you're made of when you have a special needs child. It's very emotional, and I will tell you, it changes your life, and it certainly changed my life.
Oh, wow.
And he didn't speak till he was 5. He's a brilliant kid, but something is triggering this in child after child after child, and there's a lot of different suspicions and whatnot. But I think we got to figure it out. I mean, there's been some pretty tough things. And, one day, 5 years old, imagine your child being 5 years old, not being able to, verbalize anything. and he says one word to Nikki. And Nikki gets that word, and she just latched onto it. She kept repeating it to Finn, and then, from there, we built, what we have now. It was the foundation for the beginning of him verbalizing, communicating, expressing himself, and he said some really profound things. One of the things he told us was, he said, it was so hard because I knew what I wanted to tell you guys. I couldn't get it out. I mean, that's,
sure.
That's something, and I attribute it to Nikki, I mean, she went all out, and, we both, redirected our focus on priorities.
You bet. Now, before I forget to ask, can you tell us one Finnism? Because I know what a Finnism is, but I bet everybody else doesn't. Finn has Finnisms. I'm like, let's have him say a Finnism. Do you have a Finnism off the top of your head? If you don't, that's fine. But he does create drive. Finnisms, which is way cool.
Sex drive.
Really?
Why do they have to be?
Interesting. You picked that one.
Driving, Dad?
Oh my God.
I mean, I could go on and on. Yeah, but
right. I get it.
He comes up with something new every day. I'll say something to him, and he'll look at me and he'll go, "You were being sarcastic, weren't you?" He goes, "Explain sarcasm to me." And and he'll focus on it and remember it, and then try to apply it. And one of the things with autism, they have no filters. Sometimes they're socially awkward, and it's a handicap, but you know what? Sometimes it's a joy because you see the world for what it really is.
I agree. I totally agree with you. Yeah. Now, we're obviously brought up Nikki a bunch of times, so I'm going to tell the world about Nikki a little bit. I actually creeped on George because that's what I do as a journalist. So who better to go to than his wife? And I said, listen, I want to talk to you about this man. I want you to tell me about who this man is. This is what I know about your wife, and this is in conversations, and this is what your audience should know about this woman. There are many women out there, Nikki, Christie, and this is, I know she can't listen tonight. She said she was going to be busy, so I'm directing this to your wife. There are many women out there that admire your strength and your courage and your sense of loyalty to your husband, and they find it very refreshing and wonderful. So without saying too much, say that Nikki is, and get ready for it because you're going to be the coolest guy in the world. Yeah, he's got a wife 30 years younger than him. That gives him total bragging rights, I'm sure, in the male world because she's like 30 years younger, and that girl is gorgeous. I told her that last night. I'm like, go on his page and look at his wife, right? I mean, most of us would die to look like that. So I'm like, okay, she teaches yoga. She does hair. She's a phenomenal mother. She's a phenomenal wife. Now, what else I need to say will be unsaid. So this is what I'm going to read to the listening audience. This is what George has to say about his wife, which is, she has a smile that's seemingly lit from within. She's very unguarded and fearless, always strong, supportive, and an anchor for me. You were married at a beatnik coffee house, which is so awesome because I'm a total hippie. And I'm like, oh, my God, I love it. They got married there. And she doesn't have a malicious bone in her body. Now, the retort to this. This is what Nikki has to say about her husband. And the reason that I read this on this interview is because I think it's vitally important to the people out there, the naysayers and the individuals that think that they know who this man is. The person that normally stands next to you, beside you, and with you every day of your life knows you best. And this is what she has to say about the man I'm interviewing. He's changed my whole world and the world of our family. He understands me completely, and he gives me room to grow. He is a man of his word, and he works hard for us. He is my hero because he follows what he believes in no matter what the cost. And that is the definition of a real outlaw. And actually, Nikki, that's the definition of a totally kick-ass wife. Did I say ass on radio? I can do that. It's my show.
Yes, you did.
That's a little bit about Nikki and George. That's a love story, folks. See, he's not mean all the time. He's never mean, right? Okay, we're not going to do anything. Okay, so before the last few things that I have for you, I kept telling myself I wasn't going to ask you this, but you know what? Every guest on my show has asked this question, George, and you want to know why? Because let me tell you. Do you watch Wendy Williams, the talk show host?
I have.
You know, the black lady?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
You know her little saying, how she'll sit down on the couch and she'll be like, we're best friends in my head, right? She'll say that about like a celebrity. She'll be like, in my head, we're best friends. See, I have a guy in my head, and I've been best friends with him for like 2 years. And now for a year, I've been asking everybody. I've been asking publicists. I've been going to try to get to events. And you've met the man in my head who's my BFF. He's one of my top 5 interviews that I want in my life. So I got to ask, because you've been in the presence of greatness. So talk to me a little bit about that guy, Michael Madsen, because he's my best friend in my head. He's one of my top 5. I want to interview him so bad, and he's so pretty. And I know he's married, so I'm not trying to hit on him. I just want to interview him. So you got to tell me what he's like. Got to tell me.
He's elusive. You never know what he's going to say because he's going to say what's
really
on his mind. And
okay.
He's very talented.
I know.
Very driven when he's working. A good friend, anytime I reach out to him, he gets back to me. And I enjoy being friends with him. I've known him for a long time. I became better friends with him through David Carradine, through the whole Kill Bill with Lucy Liu and Michael.
Right.
And
I remember.
David. David was a really good guy. David was very, here's a guy that had a hit television show, Kung Fu. I don't know if your listeners remember. That show was, it's the most underrated show, I think, in history. That show gave a piece of philosophy, Eastern philosophy, weekly to the American public, and they didn't even get it. They were watching the fighting and the kung fu and all that stuff, and they were taking the show a direction where David didn't want to go, and he walked off. He just walked off the set, and I'm done. And not many people would walk off a hit television show, and so Michael, myself, we were all influenced from David. He was, about 10, 12 years older than most of us, even like 20 years older than Michael. But I got a great Michael Mann story for you. This is probably 1993 or 94, maybe 95. And there's a young Hell's Angel standing next to me. And this is like when you talk about that era, the tradition starting to change. And he looks at me and he goes, look at that jerk. He goes, he thinks he's Michael Mann and Michael Madsen. And it was Michael Madsen. He had come up to visit me. And
oh my God, are you serious?
Yeah, he goes, look at that guy. He thinks he's Michael Madsen, man. Check him out. He goes, what an idiot. And he walked up, and I said, hey, I'd like to introduce you to Michael Madsen. And, it was funny. This new guy looked about 2 inches tall after I introduced him to him. But that's a good Michael Madsen story. Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Michael
that's why I
Madsen's
figured
a
who
good guy.
better to ask.
Next time I talk to him, he doesn't do a lot of interviews, but I'll mention it to him.
I know.
I'm not
and
making no promises.
And the thing is this. No, you know what? Here's the problem. And we both kind of live in the same world in this, in that I've been doing this I've been interviewing people for a long time. And I know that I get told often that I do pretty well. And what people don't understand is people like me, I didn't approach George, meeting you, because you were a Hell's Angel. I approached you because I wanted to see the man behind those eyes. I wanted to know who that person was. It wasn't the fact that you were on television, etc. And I've always said that I've seen many sides of him, and I've researched him for a long time, and, the whole 9 yards. I keep asking people as a tongue-in-cheek now. I've been asking for months, like, oh, Michael Madsen. Today you're going to make my day, right? You know what? I could ask a friend of mine who's filming a film right now with him, and I could say, could you do this? I just want to get it on my own. You know that feeling like you want to earn it?
I understand.
Like, okay, I don't want to just say that. I'm trying. But pretty soon I'm going to roll over like a cheap penny because I'm over it. I'm kind of over it now. I'm like, it ain't Buddha.
Well,
okay? I've been trying. It's not working.
Well, he would be a fun guy to interview. You know.
Oh, without a doubt, absolutely, without a doubt.
He's a humble guy. He's a great guy and a great talent.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, before I forget and before I talk about that quick history of the Hells Angels, there is a fan that you have. There's a woman by the name of Michelle Erickson. God love that beautiful woman. She's listening right now. And she was a little shy about saying this. So I said, when I talk to George on air, I'm going to mention this to him. And let me tell you why. She's an avid fan of yours. She's been watching. She adores. She thinks your wife is wonderful. She said, I could listen to that man forever. So here's the big question, George. Are we looking at a History Channel season 2? Are you going to do Outlaw Chronicles twice? Season 2? Or is that not possible?
I don't know. You know, I don't know.
Okay.
You know, I mean, sometimes, you know, these things go on for, you know, a couple of years and then they come back. But I will tell you this, and I can't talk about it because I signed a non-disclosure agreement. I'm exploring a new show. And we should know something. You're getting a scoop on this. I should know something
oh my God.
In the near future.
Scooping.
Yep. So
okay, great.
I haven't talked about it, but
well, I won't make you talk about it. She just kept saying to me, she's like, would you please, you know, she made a point to ask me a couple different times, like, hey, could you just ask him if it's going to happen? And I know sometimes how that works. I can't talk about it, so I just want to make sure I fulfilled her request. And if you ever need a fan club, there you go.
I would entertain the thought if they wanted to continue to do it with, you know, with integrity, which I think they did the first time.
Sure.
You know, I think the birth of Outlaw Biker is a great story to be told, and I think there's been a lot of conflicts and stuff that I think the public would like to know about, and I think maybe you know, educating the public in turn might educate the participants in those problems, and you know, maybe somehow everybody could rise above it. You know, my whole thought was, you know, the first time I met Taco Bowman, I don't know if you know who Taco is. He was the leader of the Outlaws.
From the book, right?
Yeah, he's the leader of the
Outlaws.
Outlaws.
Him in the book, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, go ahead.
And he, you know, and I approached him from the position that, you know what, if I was born in Chicago, there's a good possibility I would have been an outlaw. And if he would have been born California, you know, he would have been a Hell's Angel. And I truly believe that. And, you know, I don't think I'm better than anybody, but I was happy with where I was. I wasn't competing with anybody. And I think going into these different negotiations with the Mongols and the Banditos and the Outlaws, I think they appreciated that, you know, because I respected all those guys, you know. I have never met a Mongol or a outlaw or a bandito that I disliked. You know, I may not agree with them on certain issues, but I always had something in common with them, and I always had something to talk to them about. I spent a year in Texas with one of the leaders of the Banditos. You know, him and I shared a cell together. It was you know, a real experience.
Oh, I imagine so.
Anyways.
Okay, so to the listening audience, I want to go through this. I'm just going to read this off, and again, the main reason that I'm only reading it off is because of the fact that I felt that it wasn't as pertinent to talk about HA history as it is to talk about you and your history as a whole. So this is for the listening audience. To those of you that are very unfamiliar with George's past, he was the longest-serving president in club history. August of 76, that's when he was voted in as prospect. Within 4 months later, December 26, 1976, got a full patch date on that time. 1977 was the VP patch. In 78, he founded the Ventura chapter. 2001 was the entire whole incident with the 59-count indictment. And then, of course, in 2011, you obviously, of course, quit the Hells Angels. You've served 2 prison terms, 1 state and 1 federal. This is
three actually.
The question. Oh, I apologize. They didn't.
No, you don't have to apologize.
Didn't show that. I'm sorry, I didn't know that. Well, no, usually when you research somebody, George, you're supposed to get stuff like that right. So I feel that, oh, goodness, how did I miss that? Okay, well, it's not really as important as these 2 questions are, which is this. First off, I want to ask you, at the age that you're at right now, and we all know you're a day over 40.
Right.
If you could go, we're just going to say that, George, okay?
If
you could go back, if you could go back, knowing what you do now, this life, would you have still worn that patch and placed yourself as president?
Absolutely.
That's what I thought.
It's part of my journey, and I think it was just meant to happen, and I learned a lot from that, and it's put me to this place here. I've been certainly made some mistakes. I wish that I could change, but that's all part of the learning process. If you don't make those mistakes,
of course,
you can't move forward and become a better person. So did I make some mistakes? Sure, I did. Do I regret it? I regret the mistakes, but I don't regret what I did and how I got here. I do it all over again. If I was 1966 right now, and I could walk in that garage and buy that motorcycle for $200, I'd do it in a heartbeat.
I imagine so. Now, parent to parent, one thing that I thought about was, if it were me, I would find any and all ways to kind of shield my children from knowing too much about my history. So my question is, how have you been able to safeguard your kids from obvious things? Clearly, it's difficult being who you are, I imagine.
It's certainly, my oldest daughter, became one of my criminal lawyers. She knows pretty much everything about me. She's a very smart woman. My son, who has now, passed away, was a club member. At one time he was the youngest club member in the world. He was 18 years old. He was a, full-fledged Hell's Angel. But he'd been around the club since he was 3 years old. It wasn't like something he just, I immersed them in the culture with me. And, I was a family man. I come from a traditional Greek family, very close-knit. Aubrey and Finn, not so much. And, I hope Finn never gets on a motorcycle his whole life. But I guess, if he did, I'll support him. But I'm not pushing it. And, I went that route once. My son and I had, Georgie, had fought side by side, worn in the same patch, rode across country together, and I wouldn't change that, but I like where Finn's coming from, and what he's doing and where he's heading, and I don't want to influence him to do something he doesn't want to do. Whatever he wants to do, I'll certainly support it. But I don't think he has any interest in motorcycles. And, he's somewhat, he's perceptive. He knows what's going on, like with me in the club, and, he doesn't understand it. And, to shame somebody socially and publicly is, to me, that's bullying, and that's one of the reasons I left. I know, when somebody doesn't want to have a problem with you and you continue to harass them, then that makes you a bully. And there's no other way to explain it.
I agree 100%. I agree with you. Now, I debated about asking this question, so I'm going to ask anyways because it alludes to the obvious, which is, and myself, I've even asked this question. We're all kind of wondering, and we're very happy about this, by the way. But, like, for instance, I have a dear group of friends whose relatives are all, of course, mobsters. Right. So, you leave the mafia lifestyle, and oftentimes you don't leave breathing. I'm going to guess that your club is somewhat similar to that affiliation, and so we're wondering, it's an interesting dynamic because you quit on your own terms, and sometimes the average person's going to say he's alive and well and breathing, so we're very happy about that, mind you, but it's a little intriguing. Does that make sense to us?
I completely understand people? It. That's a question you'd have to address to my former associates. I don't know,
okay. I
and I'm certainly fine. I'm not trying to be bravado.
No.
I don't know.
That's okay.
I don't know what's in their mind. I haven't damaged them in any way. And I think my personal problem is, I think, with one individual, and certainly, a powerful individual.
Yes. So now, obviously, that brings us to the two big important dates that I want to highlight, of course, which all of you should drop on your calendar. The first of which I'm going to talk about regardless, which is, of course, the Evening with George. That's coming up this weekend, September 17th at 7 o'clock. It's located at NAMBA Performing Arts Space in Ventura. Now, as I understand it, last I saw you post, people can still show up, but it's kind of a catch-22, right?
It's sold out. All the seats are sold out. All the seats are sold out.
Okay, so nobody can go. Okay.
They can. People can come if they want to stand. But there's no seats
so
left.
That's an option.
But the capacity is very large for people. So people can certainly come there and stand. I'm not sure they, want to stand and hear me run my mouth for a couple of hours. The benefit is they get their book on the 17th instead of having to wait till next week. The book,
exactly.
The book it comes out officially next Tuesday. It's already out overseas in England and Ireland, Scotland, South America, New Zealand, and Australia. And I repeated all those countries because I'm really proud. You know what? To sit down and attempt to write a book and achieve that goal. It's a big deal, man. I'm really.
It's an absolute big deal.
Yeah, and I tried to do it honestly. Of course, I've been challenged to take a lie detector test by Sonny.
Well, yeah, I wasn't going to mention that because I read that.
Well, you can
just
mention
recently.
it.
I saw the polygraph. No, I didn't want to mention it.
I don't care.
Well, we can mention it. Okay, so basically, I found this on social media where it clearly asks you to take a polygraph test to prove whether you're lying or not. And that's, of course, I'm assuming.
Let me tell you this.
Okay.
Thomas Dunn, who is my publisher, I spent 15 hours with their outside counsel lawyer ensuring that there would be no libel lawsuits coming back on Thomas Dunn or myself. So, they talk about a lie detector test. A lie detector test, they're not even admissible in court because they don't work. If they think I'm lying, I will see them in court because they can sue me. There's libel laws. You just can't make stuff up. And everything I wrote in that book was vetted and supported by newspaper articles, court records, whatever they may be, But maybe if Sonny wants to take a lie detector test, I guess maybe I could take one too, even though I think they're ridiculous.
Well, and that's just it. And just as a note to the listening audience, and I don't know if you know this or not, but when I was sent a copy of George's book, an unedited version and the final version, and the reason I did that, there's two reasons. As a writer, of course, I'm doing a review of your book. So obviously, of course, I want to make sure that I have the most current version that you've done. But most importantly, what I asked your publishing house flat out was, well, I'm a journalist. How do I know who fact-checked this? How do I know this? How do I know this? And they reassured me, of course, gave me all the details and information in terms of where you got this information, et cetera. So obviously, if you have professional reviewers that are going to review your book and talk about this, there's obviously legitimacy to it, in my opinion. And I can say this because I'm the reviewer, of course. So, yeah, and before I forget, so I wanted to go back to the 17th. So basically, you're doing a lecture and a slideshow. I know you're doing the book signing and, of course, a Q&A session as well, right?
What I'm doing is the lecture, it's kind of like the Outlaw Chronicles with me running the slideshow and, taking the audience through the history, and I do different ones. Sometimes I do them very linear, and I'll start at a certain date and go through. Sometimes I just talk about stories like, I worked on my slideshow, and you ever heard of Smacky Jack?
No.
Smacky Jack was a Satan slave from San Fernando Valley, and he used to wear a pliers and a little bag on his Levi's, and in the bag were filled with teeth. And if you get Hunter Thompson's Hell's Angels, he was kind of amazed with Smacky Jack. He writes about him, and I've got a couple of Smacky Jack stories. I knew Smacky Jack, and I'm Saturday night. I'm going to talk about him and some of the things he related to me. When I came around the Saint and Slave, Smacky Jack was an old timer. Everybody looked up to him, and I was the new kid on the block, if you will. So talking to Smacky Jack was like, talking to, a legend. And so, that's what I do. I tell stories. I sit up there and tell stories, and then at the end I do a Q&A. I let people ask me questions.
Right.
I don't hold any questions back. Anybody wants, they can ask me anything they want. I might not answer it, but I don't, I don't have somebody there filtering the questions. It's just like,
of course.
You want to ask me something? Now's your opportunity to ask me. Ask me anything you want.
That's exactly right. And that's exactly what he told me, too, was that. I wanted to flip over to the other side because you already mentioned the second thing I was going to, which is the big book release is set for September 20th. Obviously, the name, again, of the book is Exile on Front Street. So 2 questions relative to this, because I know people want to know, especially my fans, because they're everywhere. Are you going to have things like Spanish or French or Italian versions? Is it going to be an audio book, do you know?
They're talking about an audio book, and we sold the rights to Poland.
Okay.
So I'm thinking if it's going to be they're going to do it in Polish. The show is really big in Russia. I was hoping that
really,
they might. It was huge in Russia. I did all types of interviews, and they asked me about Putin because Putin's friends with the Night Hawks over there. Night Wolves, that's what they are, the Night Wolves. And I knew them in the 80s. They initially had come over to become Hell's Angels from Russia when it was still, a communist country, and things didn't work out. And now they're, friends with Putin, and they're very pro-Russian organization, But I had a lot of questions imposed on me about that and my old relationship with them, and but from what they tell me, the show was really, really popular in Russia. The show's shown all over the world. It's shown everywhere except Japan and China, I believe, and Korea, Vietnam. It hasn't shown in any Asian countries yet, but everywhere else, Yeah.
No, I know, exactly. And see, that was my next question, which was, I said, will you ever author another chapter of your life? And you started talking about a fiction book. So apparently George is doing a fiction book, right?
Well, I'm doing a fiction book about a Marine that comes home and watches the outlaw bike world change before his very eyes. And he is torn between doing what's right and succumbing to doing what's he knows isn't correct to do. And there's good cops, bad cops, good bikers, bad bikers. I'm really excited about it. I'm just as excited about this as I was doing my memoir, and they're editing it right now. They seem very excited about it. It's 3 volumes. I got the first volume done, and I'm about a quarter of the way through the second volume, and it's kind of based after my life, as you probably imagined. I guess.
Yes, I actually did quite imagine that.
Yeah. So I'm really.
Before I forget to ask. You're excited. I'm excited to see it. My gosh. I was excited to get the book, and then I got the book, and I was like, oh, my gosh. So now I'll be excited to have you read the review. It's very interesting. It's a good review. I think it is. And it's not just because I wrote it. I think it's a very fair review.
Well, good. And that's
what
I
have to tell you. I've written.
I saw one of Sonny's friends did a terrible review, called me a coward, and said this and said that and said this about me. The interesting thing is this particular person claims to have had a relationship for the last 30 years, but I'll be damned if I remember them. All these people pop up out of the woodwork that seem to know me inside and out, but have never met me, which I find very interesting and kind of intriguing. Are you still there?
Hello, George.
I'm here. Are you there?
Sorry about that. I lost you somehow. Can you hear me?
Well, I can hear you.
You can hear me.
Did you?
Yes.
Did you call me?
All of a sudden.
Again, or?
Yeah. All of a sudden, I just lost you. Isn't that weird?
Well,
okay. I'm here.
Stranger things have happened to my phone.
Do. That's okay. Okay, we only have 3 more things to cover because you've been such a gracious host. So first off, I want to do this. I want to take my 30 seconds to say 4 different things, which is, of course, and I do not want to forget about this, Rebecca Lang with St. Martin's Press, thank you so very much for sending me not only the first copy, but the second copy of George's book so that I could sit on a plane and in a hotel room and everywhere else and read it. Thanks so much. Oh, Joyce, Cabot, I cannot say enough about you at Foodie Entertainment. I love our conversations. You are so awesome. You have the cutest little voice, and I can't wait to do more work with you. Nikki, your wife, to Nikki Christie, from me to you, thank you for listening to me gab at you about my love life, about my children, about your husband, about making me feel better about this interview, and, of course, doing such a wonderful job with your children. I thank you, George, but we'll get to that at the end. I want to read off all of these different ways to find George so that people know this. On Facebook, he has a personal page, but it's actually George Gus Christie Jr. He also has a professional page. Yeah. Which is your actual name, yes. And then you, of course, have George Christie page. The website is georgechristie.com, felonyprisonconsultants.com. The book will be on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, Goodreads.com. You can go to the History Channel, and it's history.com. And, of course, the show is called Outlaw Chronicles. Also, you're on Twitter, which is at GeorgeFPC, and, of course, also iTunes and IMDb. Did I miss anything?
Nope. You're pretty efficient.
So I got everything. Well, I do try whatsoever. So this is my last question that I want to ask you, and I saved it for last for a reason, because it is a quote that you said that resonates with me, and it made me realize that there is some part of myself, surprisingly, not so much surprisingly, that is, by your definition, it would make me an outlaw. You've said, you don't have to own a motorcycle or wear a patch on your back to be an outlaw. So I thought it would be neat if you could provide the audience what you believe your best definition of the word outlaw is, because it's very different and very unique and very fitting, to be honest with you.
Well, everybody has their own conception of outlaw, and you'll notice in the beginning of the book I define the difference between a criminal and an outlaw. An outlaw is somebody that kind of I don't want to say makes up their own rules as they go along. They establish a set of rules, but they stick by them. You can't change the rules, to suit your own needs. A real outlaw, has a moral compass and he follows it. And it may not be, the standards of society at large, but, they are what, in his heart he believes to be true. And I think a lot of that came from growing up in the Greek culture. One of the things was we dealt with our own problems. We didn't go to outsiders. I think you read about that in the book.
Yes.
It was the same thing when I got in the Marines. A couple of incidents happened where they were they were doing some investigations, and it was obvious I knew what transpired, and I wouldn't give them any information. And I think that's one of the reasons I wound up going to work for the Department of Defense, because they liked the fact I could keep my mouth shut. So I think, you can work for the government and be an outlaw. You can be a school teacher and be an outlaw. You know, you can be a doctor and be an outlaw. I mean, anybody can be an outlaw if they're true to themselves and they stick, you know, to what they believe in, and they aren't influenced, you know, by society at large, or are they going to be judged by society at large? I mean, it's a very complex issue, and I try to explain it in the book, and it's difficult. You know, it's almost like, you know, you have to understand it, you know, to try to break it down. It just it doesn't compute sometimes. But you know, you'll run across people in life, and you know, they aren't prepared to step up. I think that if you're willing to walk down that road and you know, meet the consequences, whoever you encounter on that path, you're an outlaw. You know, you know, certainly you can be fluid in what you do, but you know, I think you got to find a moral compass and, you know, stick with it.
You betcha, without a doubt. Oh, and I did forget to ask you this question. Now, to those of you that don't know, George has like one tattoo. I'm kidding. Have you ever looked at him? Oh, my gosh. So I'm a little bummed because you used to have this cute little tattoo shop that you owned, and I'm a virgin, and I'm about to get a tattoo, and I was like, how cool is that to go to George's tattoo shop? But I don't think you have that anymore, right?
I sold it. After the problem and with my last case, and, you know, the tattoo, you know, everything has changed. You know, you talk about the motorcycle culture changing.
Right.
Everything's changing. The whole tattoo industry is changing. It was no longer any fun, you know. And
really,
I didn't enjoy it. It's a different breed of tattoo artists. But I will say this, a better breed of tattoo artists. I don't certainly agree with a lot of their philosophical positions, but I think that they're better tattoo artists. Some of these guys just do amazing work. You know, I had the last, you know, 10 years of my tattoo shop. I just watched some incredible tattoo artists come through there. And the amazing thing was these guys were all under 25. And they were just amazing tattoo artists. Amazing artists. You know, I mean, their subjects were, you know, the skin was their canvas. I mean, it sounds a little corny, but it was, you know, absolutely, I mean that sincere.
Well, and just out of curiosity, do you even know how many tattoos you have? Because I've looked at you, and I can't even count.
Well, all up and down my arms, my back.
I know.
You know,
I know.
You know, you hang out in the tattoo shop, you're going to get tattooed on. So
right.
If you don't want a tattoo, don't go to a tattoo shop.
Good advice. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'll be visiting once or twice, and that's about it. I'm still working the nerve up. Soon, though. It's going to be very soon.
I can tell you're right on the horizon of it. You're on the cusp of getting your tattoo.
Well, you can't hang with all sorts of motorcycle riders. I'm telling you, I'm in a climate all the time, and they're everywhere.
Right.
I mean, and they got tats up, down, and sideways, and I ride with people that got tats, and they're like, just man up and get it done. And I'm like, I burst, okay? I manned up. I gave birth. That's a pretty big deal. So I'm there. I'm almost there. I'm definitely almost there. Okay, so in conclusion of this interview, the last thing I have are actually a few surprises for you, George Christie, and I bet you didn't know that was going to happen today.
No, I did not.
Awesome. That means your wife didn't tattle on me, and that's a good thing.
No.
I'm kind of bummed because I originally had said to Joyce and to yourself that I was going to come and see you on Saturday, and now I have a very, very, very dear friend of mine who needs a heart transplant, and so I'm going to stay home, and I'm going to make hundreds of bags of truffles, and I'm going to sell them, and I'm going to help him because that's what family and friends do. So that means I can't come and see George.
I think you should.
I do. Well, and I'm kind of bummed because I'm like, oh, my God, I get to meet George. See, I got this really cool Exile on Front Street book, and it's got no signature. And the only way I'm going to get that is if I see George. So I had to orchestrate some ways where that might happen. So I got a few offers for you.
Okay.
one of the things is, and this actually is an offer from someone else. Somebody came to me, they knew that I was interviewing you, and they said, ask him this, and you're going to probably laugh. I'm very heavy in independent film. Your little buddy, Mr. Madsen, of course, does independent film as well. And so
Right.
I have really dear friends that I screen their films and I do all this stuff. So long story short, one of them said, do you think that he would actually play himself in a movie? So would you do that?
That would be a big task, you know. I do have a SAG car, and I've acted in movies. Yeah, I do. And I was in a movie. I played a cop, and the reason I took the part was because the cop arrested an innocent guy and sent him to jail. And I thought it was a pretty good statement. But I've acted a few times, and it's kind of fun, but I don't think I'd want to play myself.
Okay, so that takes care of number one. Number two.
Unless the price was right.
Well, we'll work on that, George. Second of all, one of my my second home is New York City, and I see you've been to New York City before, and I forgot, and I meant to ask you this. Outside of Saturday's signings, do you have other ones penciled so far or no?
Well, no. I'm doing a few down here in Southern California, and I actually tried to get something going in Texas because I kind of wanted to get my position out after this Waco thing, and the Texas people are really pensive. They don't want another situation like Waco to happen, the shootout there at Twin Peaks, and I haven't been able to get it off the ground. I haven't completely abandoned it yet, but I still may go out on the road, but and I've got this other film project, television series. I'll know here in a few weeks if it's a go or not. So I'm not sure.
The reason I'm asking, and there is a reason, because New York is my second home. So I have like a second family there. And so I was offered the opportunity to do a live interview with anyone I wanted in Times Square. And I thought to myself, that George guy, he's got a new book coming out. People are going to want to see him. Times Square is huge. I thought to myself, I wonder if I asked George if he'd want to do this again live in Times Square and give him an opportunity to have a full live audience. Would he like that? So I'm asking.
George would like that.
Yay! George would like that. Yay! Okay, so that's good. So we can work on that. Third thing. I am doing a calendar, and I don't think you know that. I am doing a calendar that is full of, I call it my calendar of creatives, meaning there's indie film in there, there's Real Housewives in there, there's Mob Wives in there, there's a little bit of everybody, all of my friends in there, and they have either books, television shows, or films to promote. And I thought to myself, if I ask him really, really, really nice, maybe he would allow me to take a picture with him, and I could put it in my calendar, and I could put my review of his book in there and his book in there. And then millions of people could see his book in this cute little calendar, and then he could look at himself all year round. So I'm asking.
I would be interested in that.
Well,
I don't have to take my clothes off.
But I'm just throwing that out there. No, you don't.
I don't have to take my.
You have a wife, okay? Pretty sure she wouldn't like that.
Okay.
Just throw. And we're not going there. So we're not going there. Okay, calendar check. I'm going to be in San Diego at the end of October. Not sure if you're close to that.
I am. I'm about 3.5 hours away.
The reason that I ask that is because I am a panelist. I'm one of the panels for filmmakers. I'm going to be talking to people about how to get their film produced. So I'm very, very honored that I'm being asked to be a panelist at something called the Fantastic Horror Film Festival. And again, I thought about Mr. Christie because you know what? We could kind of tie you in there somewhere, and maybe we get a little spot for you. You could sign some books, etc. Could be a business venture for like the both of us, and then you could meet me in person, and I could meet you and. That would be kind of cool.
Well, we can make that happen. You know who puts all that stuff together? Joyce.
And so I'm just throwing these ideas out there. And the last thing, of course, that I want to mention is my son mentioned this. And so this is probably a combination of you and Finn. My son was a seizure patient for 3 years up until a month ago. And one of the things that he did was he decided on his own to design and to create a comic book. He wrote it, he illustrated it, and so we have now put that together. And so we're going to the Comic Cons and we're going to sell this comic book and we're going to give money to research. So my son saw your son and he saw the drawings that he did and he said, can you ask that man, meaning George, at one of the Comic Cons, he wants to take some of the funds that he earns and he wants to give it to autism research or any kind of autism something, because he saw that your son had an issue, and it's not exactly a seizure issue, but that's just how my son kind of rolls. And I said, I will ask George to ask Finn if that would be okay.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yay, Dad said yes. That's awesome. Okay, that's all the wonderful things that I have for you. I can certainly talk to you off here about all these other little things, but the last thing I wanted to say is this. Normally, any person that comes on my show usually gets this spiel where you have to sit and listen to me tell you what I think of you. I don't need to do that because of the fact that when the review comes out, you're going to read it for yourself, because there's a lovely little soliloquy of what I think of you. But this much I will say to you, George Christie. I was very nervous about interviewing you because you have quite the persona, not so much because you used to be in an organization for 33 years that's infamous, but more so because you're so magnanimous and you've done so very much with your life and you lived so many things, so many lives, so many loves. I admire you very much and I respect you very much. And my perception of you has evolved over the time that I've researched you. And I'm very grateful and I appreciate it so much that you've taken the time to come on my show. I hope that I've done a good job for you. I hope you're not disappointed.
Well, I'm not disappointed at all, and thank you for the kind words. And
it's very nice.
I really I appreciate it, and it means a lot to me.
Thank you. And I do hope that our paths will cross sooner than later. Obviously, of course, I wish you nothing but luck on Saturday. Obviously, I will get the review done and put together so you can post it, and I'll make sure that I get it to all the powers that be so that they have it before the book release comes out. I have a nice bunch of followers that are very excited about getting the book. And just to let you know and your fans know, about 2 hours after this episode is done, we will go ahead and it will be archived. So basically, anybody can listen to this anytime that they want. It'll be on there all the time. And certainly, I'll get a hold of you in terms of all these other things, because I think it would be some great ventures that we could do together, and I certainly look forward to meeting your family at some point. This has just been lovely.
All right. Sounds great.
All right, George, thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Anytime, dear. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay. Was that just not cool or what? I just got to say that was an amazing almost 2 hours. One more time, I want to go through all the ways on social media, in which case you can find him along with the book. One more time. On Facebook, he is listed by his real name, which is George Gus Christie, Jr. He also has his regular page, which is George Christie. And the Christie is spelled Christie. I don't want to forget about that. Also, iTunes, IMDb. His Twitter handle is @George, and it's FPC. All the various websites, georgechristie.com, felonyprisonconsultants.com, amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com, goodreads.com. He is also on the History Channel, which is history.com, and the name of the show is called Outlaw Chronicles, Hell's Angels, so we don't want to forget about that. One more time, of course, Rebecca and Joyce, thank you so very much. Thank you, Nikki and George. Thank you to all of my listening audience. Some of you have been so very gracious and supportive, and I really, really appreciate you taking the time to listen in. I know this is a lengthy interview, but when you're interviewing someone of this magnitude, you have to make sure that you do right by them, and I do hope that I've done right. Want to remind everybody one more time, I just found out Sunday, 11 o'clock Central Standard Time, we are going to be talking about the fundraiser for spinal cord injury research. Please make sure you tune in. I am done for the evening. I'm going to sit and try to relax before my next show comes up. I want to thank you guys one more time. Have a great evening. I'll talk to you on Sunday.
All you need is love.
The Beat Bugs rock! Did you know you can only find their gear at Target? It's true, so hurry over.
All you need is love, love. Love is all you need. All you need is love.
We love the Beat Bugs! And Target is the only place you can find them and all their gear. Come join the fun and jam with us.
Love is all you need.